All right. As I mentioned, I just purchased 2 pairs of white-eared pheasants that ended up having upper respiratory infections. I would be more upset about it if I didn't understand how difficult it is to care for a respiratory infection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the problem and help y'all treat it in such a way that when this happens to you, you can treat it, stop being such a know-it-all, using antibiotics that don't work. I'll show you why they don't work and why veterinarians will tell you that every bird that ends up with a respiratory infection is just really deadly to your whole flock and they need to be culled. But this is particularly true of digging species and just mountain species. So I'm going to go through this for you. Okay, there's a couple of factors that play out here. Number one, birds that come from very cold places. You could think of the raven. You can think of the ptarmigan or the ruffed grouse, as is depicted here. One of their adaptations is that their nares, or in the more appropriate terminology, nares instead of nostrils, are feathered or bioengineered in such a way that they help to heat air that they inhale and prevent a lot of warm air from escaping, and also to protect the birds from releasing telltale steam, which gives them away, their presence away to predators. So again, species of birds that live where it's very cold have adaptations that help them to stay warm by controlling, thermoregulating temperatures, and also to prevent the escape of steam, which predators can use to help detect their prey. One of the reasons that eared pheasants and other cold-adapted montane land fowl have a lot of difficulty when you end up with them when they have a respiratory infection is that their nares are sealed up. They are a cold weather adapted species. So when they get a sinus infection here, it becomes a real problem, and soon it spreads because it's a bacterial infection. And let's go over the avian respiratory system. Many of you already know this, so you can just tune it out, but it is just consider this a refresher course. When a bird inhales, they're actually exhaling air. So they're breathing in when they exhale because of these air sacs. You'll want to read up on how birds breathe. Birds have 8 or 9 air sacs that function as bellows that keep air flowing through the lungs. Air passes through the lungs in one direction only. Every exhalation, that's breathing out, completely renews the air in the lungs. Birds have 8 or 9 air sacs that function as bellows that keep the air flowing through the lungs, right? So let's go and look at what the air sacs look like. And I don't know all this stuff by heart either. I have to go and look at it and remind myself what everything is. So air sac, air sac, air sac, air sac, air sac. These are the bellows. So one of the problems with a respiratory infection is that because of the way birds breathe, their respiratory tract can become infected. And as you know, birds have hollow bones, and they actually breathe through their bones, which is crazy. There are many theories about the pathways which air takes in the bird's respiratory system. It is a subject that scientists are still researching. The following is a very simplified explanation of one of the theories. The theory suggests that a breath of air is drawn through the trachea and mesobronchus into the posterior air sacs, abdominal and caudal thoracic. When chest muscles draw the ribs forward, I think it's thoracic, I can't pronounce it, draw the ribs forward and lower the sternum. Upon expiration, that's exhalation, air is forced from the posterior air sac into the lungs where gas exchange takes place. When the bird takes a second breath, the air in the lungs is sucked into the cranial air sacs, caudal, thoracic, cervical, and clavicular. The cranial air sacs act as a holding chamber which provides a small backflow of air into the lungs during expirations. That would be breathing out. The second expiration forces the air in the cranial air sacs out through the trachea. Thus, airflow through the bird's respiratory system is mostly a unidirectional circular path, which requires 2 breaths to complete. The small amount of backflow from the cranial air sacs during expiration provides the lungs with a constant flow of air. Constant airflow supplies birds with more oxygen from the air than is possible for mammals to obtain. This is a necessary adaptation in birds for maintaining their high metabolic rate and for flying. I'm going to post these so that you can read more about it. One of the reasons that it is so difficult to treat an upper respiratory infection in any land fowl, really any bird, but we're going to stick with land fowl, is because of the physiology of the sinus cavity, which is generally where the infection begins. We'll go into why it is that this begins first. Dust. Birds that dig, especially, inhale dust. Because of the morphological adaptations that we have described in these cold weather adapted species, it's very difficult for the birds to remove particulate matter that becomes infected because of the way that their nostrils, nares, are bioengineered. They inhale a lot of dirt and also the material that you feed them, which is generally some kind of a pellet, which is made out of a pulverized nutrition flour that disintegrates by pecking. And once that dust mixes with the ambient dirt of your enclosure, and very importantly, feather dander and fecal material, it produces a disease vector called poultry smut. Birds take dirt baths, landfowl take dust baths. When they take dust baths and the dust bath has lots of poultry smut in it, because they are cleaning their plumage in these dust wallows, and this material is everywhere in your enclosures, the birds end up coating their plumage with it. And when they go to preening, they rub poultry smut into their nares and into their eyes. This process begins when they're chicks because of the chick mash and the fact that the chick brooder is a very dusty, feather dander, particulate matter. The air is thick with particulate matter. That would be fines from chick mash and feather dander from their down. They are generally crowded. The light is on all the time, which keeps them active all the time. And they're inhaling dust. It is that particulate matter that becomes embedded in the sinus naval cavities when they're chicks. And when they become stressed later in life, and that could be good stress, from the breeding season, it could be stress of weather, it could be stress from crowding, and very often balance issues with the diet, where the diet is just not quite right, especially a seasonal issue with diet. The stress contributes to birds just not feeling well and getting an infection. And so this ancient particulate matter that's been with them since they were little chicks becomes further infected with the material, the poultry smut that they are exposed to throughout their lives. And they end up with an infection that itches. They use a dirty toenail to dig at it. Their eyes will often get an infection. And so the cycle of disease and infection gets underway. But again, it starts when they're chicks.